In this video, I want to introduce one of the most exciting aspects of Altair, which is the ability to add interactivity to your charts. So here I have the same plot of the cars dataset, and let me show you how we can add interactivity to this. So in this case, the interactivity is going to come from something called an Altair selection interval. And I need to save that Altair selection interval, and a common way to save it is with the name brush. And then what I need to do is I need to add that brush to this chart, and you do that using the method add selection. And then inside the parentheses, you say the variable name that you gave the selection. So in this case, I say brush. So looks exactly the same. But the difference is now if I click and draw a rectangle like this, now I have this little selection rectangle that I can look at. So it's like an interval on the x-axis and the y-axis. Whereas if you were to try to do that in one of the previous ones, like if I click and drag here, nothing happens. Okay, good. So I mean, right now it's not at all clear why this would be interesting, but let me save this with the variable name C1. And then let me make another chart. Okay, I'll call it C2. And it's going to be a little different. So instead of a scatter plot with these circles, it's going to be a bar chart. And for example, let's say the x-axis is just these three origin values. And let's say the y-axis is just how many of them are there, which there's this special abbreviation in Altair, which is count, and that just says count how many there are for that particular origin. Then let me get rid of this stuff. Let me get rid of the add selection. And let's see if I did this correctly. So if I look at C2, okay, perfect. And for example, if this is coming from the origin, and if I were to check df.origin.valueCounts, then I get these numbers 254, 79, 73. And I think it's believable that these heights are 254, 79, 73. So that's like, how many rows are there that have Europe as the origin? And in this case, there are 73 of them. Okay, good. So what does this have to do with interactivity? Well, let me show you how we can draw C1 and C2 next to each other. And so if I draw this square, nothing happens yet. But let me show you how I can change the definition of C2 so that it will be affected by that selection. So I'm going to add something called transform filter. And the goal isn't for you to memorize this so much. The goal is more for you to know that this option exists and know where you can look it up. And so inside the parentheses for transform filter, I'm going to put brush. And what that's saying is only include from the data frame, only include the values which are inside the selection. So now let's look at C1 and C2 next to each other again. So it looks exactly the same. But now if I draw a square like this, now it is changing to reflect how many values there are in this particular rectangle. For example, if I come over here, then I can see that, well, I guess there are still more USA cars than Japan and Europe, but it's less of a difference than if I were to come over here to these like higher horsepower and heavier cars, okay, where there's like this huge difference between how many of them are from USA versus how many of them are from Europe and Japan. And maybe the last thing I'll show is, what if you don't want the like scale to bounce around like this? What can you do? And so again, don't bother trying to memorize this, just know that it exists. So I want the domain here for y, I want that to be more steady. And so to do that, well, I'm first going to wrap this in something that at first doesn't change anything. Okay, that looks exactly the same, but the advantage of wrapping that inside this alt.y is now there are all sorts of additional options that you can add, and you can look in the Altair documentation to get some of the examples. In this case, what I want to change is the scale. So I'm going to say scale equals alt.scale. And then inside the parentheses, I can say what domain I want. So in this case, let's say I want the domain to go from 0 up to 300. Okay, and now if I draw this again, so notice how now the y-axis is going from 0 up to 300. And now if I draw one of these rectangles, notice how it's not bouncing around anymore. That scale is steadily remaining at the range from 0 to 300.